up, everyone? Welcome back, and today we're going to be talking about Squad version 7, which just released. This is going to be the last significant update in 2023, and it brings a brand new faction to Squad in the Turkish Land forces. Now, if you've been keeping up with the channel, you should understand some of the basics about the Turkish Land forces. If not, you need to hit that subscribe button. Please like the video and drop a comment down below if you've had a chance to play the Turkish Land forces, and what do you think? So before we talk about the TLF, real quick, let's go over some of the other things that were added in version 7. Because I think there's a few things we need to highlight that were gameplay updates or bug fixes. Starting with adjustments to lat and hat minimum arming distance. So for lats now it's 15 meters, and for hats it's now 20 meters. This is probably one of the biggest changes in here, although helicopter pilots will be excited to see that they will be no longer affected by suppression. In addition to those couple of updates, there is a massive list of bug fixes, everything from adjustments to trying to fix the infinite loading screen or running man glitch, to fixing the falling gun animation that sometimes happens if you get stuck between a couple of objects. There's some performance fixes here, which I'm sure many people will be excited about. And even some work put into making sure that vehicles that are destroyed by IEDs are removed from the map after being destroyed. Something that could often be an issue on narrow streets if a vehicle is blown up. Ultimately, there's a ton of updates here. I will link the patch note list below so you can take a look, but there's plenty to see here, including some fixes that are map specific. In addition to these gameplay updates and bug fixes, we also get our first 2 weapon skin packs, something we talked about in a recent video. Remember that these are limited in terms of how they can show up on the battlefield once you've customized your weapon, similar to how you would emotes. They are very specific in how they are going to be used, being with biomes and only certain weapons. And of course, in addition to the weapon skins packs, we also have a new emote pack that includes the cutthroat gesture, fist pump gesture, finger guns, can't see me gesture, and the stop gesture. I'm sure we'll be seeing these in the staging phase very soon. While wrapping up this video, OWI actually went ahead and released a hotfix to this update. This would be 7.0.1, so let me bring up this real quickly. First of all, they're making some kit adjustments to both the second and third lat for the TLF, and they've also gone ahead and adjusted the recoil to the SMG, which is probably pretty important because it does get a little bit wild. In addition, we have some general bug fixes, many of which apply to the TLF, probably just housekeeping things that needed to be addressed. Finally, we also have some known issues. In fact, I'm having a little bit of trouble with my server browser that is limiting searching and delaying some of the results. Now we get into what everybody is most interested in, being the Turkish Land forces. Now, if you watch the video I made when this leaked or the playtest video, you should have some understanding of what to expect with the TLF. They are bringing brand new weapons and vehicles into Squad that we haven't seen yet, which is always welcome because I think it gives each faction, when they have some of this new stuff that is personal to them, it gives them their own characteristics in terms of how they can be used in the battlefield. Now, a couple of those characteristics are pretty interesting. First of all, they have no heavy anti-tank roll, and they have more light anti-tank rolls than any other faction. This is an interesting disadvantage that we'll talk a little bit about later in the video. Next up, they have 2 Grenadier variants, one with the underslung grenade launcher that we're pretty accustomed to, and then one with a standalone semi-automatic grenade launcher many of you have already heard about. Finally, a couple unique things about the faction is they have a machine gunner that fits within the direct combat roles and a special gendarme role, hopefully I'm saying that correctly, I apologize if not, that comes complete with the first modern SMG in Squad. Now, with most kits, you're going to get the MPT-76 rifle. While this is a 7.62 rifle, so it packs quite a punch, you are going to run into plenty of recoil attached to it. You will see folks sporting the MKE MGL or grenade launcher around on the battlefield. I've seen it used a little bit to create cover with their smoke option and then also suppress the enemy with the HE option. With enough coordination and communication, I think this could be effective when making some sort of assault on an enemy position or objective. Another notable aspect of this faction is the MG3 with iron sights, only because you can hear that thing going off from so far away and it sounds awesome. Now, from a vehicle standpoint, there wasn't anything that surprising here, with the exception of some little things. The BMC truck is a nice variation on the logistics vehicle or transports that we already have in the game, being very distinct for the Turkish faction. You of course have the Cobra 2 MRAPs, and then you move up to the PARS 3 wheeled APC or IFV. The PARS 3 comes with an assortment of different weaponry on board, most notably the 25mm cannon. This version of the PARS 3 is going to most resemble that of an LAV, both in its chassis, the way it maneuvers, and the way it shoots. It's got plenty of speed, doesn't have a ton of armor, but can handle itself in many situations. The PARS 3 is going to come in several different variations. So you're going to have the 25mm, you'll have some RWS versions, including one with an MK19 grenade launcher. Next up, you have the ACV-15 tracked APC or IFV. While this thing looks relatively beefy, I don't know that it truly is. I think it can handle a good amount of shots. It most reminded me in terms of the way it moved like a T-Lav, but you can get this with the same 25mm cannon you can get on a Pars 3. Now that started to make me think maybe it was supposed to be in line with something like a Bradley or a BMP-2, but you lack any sort of guided missile option, which is interesting considering the Turkish land forces don't have a hat. So I thought this might be where they might make up some of that ground, give this vehicle some sort of rocket similar to what you have on a BMP-2 or a Bradley or a ZBD. I could be wrong, but I don't even feel like this is as armored as something like a Bradley. But again, I'm just guessing here. This is just based off feel, not necessarily some sort of data that I've collected. Now with both the ACV-15 and the Pars 3, the driver actually gets two forms of smokes for countermeasures. One is the engine smoke, but they also get a smoke launcher that covers nearly 360 degrees around the vehicle. Next up, the Turkish land forces operate the M60T main battle tank. I know many folks are disappointed they didn't get a Leopard, but I'm excited to see something different added to the battlefield in general. Now, while I haven't spent a ton of time in the M60T, what I have heard is that the mobility of the vehicle seems pretty solid. I will say from the gunner seat, one thing I found interesting is that the reticle is a little bit different from what I'm used to. Additionally, the reticle is black, which makes it very difficult to see things, especially in shadows or dark maps. I am interested though to start hearing more about the armor information on the M60T to see how well this will stand up against other tanks. I also realized not everyone was in love with the inclusion of the UH-1H helicopter for the Turkish land forces. Whether or not it should have been included is kind of beyond the point because it's here, and frankly, it looks cool because it's got a little bit of that retro vibe and it has a very distinct sound. From my understanding, the M60T tank and the UH-1H helicopter are both in there, and they are not necessarily what the Turkish land forces are using right now in the world. Or at least those aren't the dominant vehicles that the Turkish land forces are operating with. However, I do think that these sort of vehicles included give a little bit more personality to the Turkish land forces. And I think that's important because the last two factions we got are kind of sub-factions of factions we already had, being the PLA Marines and the Russian Airborne Forces. And while they aren't exact copies of their parent faction, they do have plenty of similarities. But there is something similar from these factions to the Turkish land forces, and that is that they are both highly mobile. Something we've talked a lot about on this channel is mobility and mechanized infantry being a big push coming to squad, especially with the infantry combat overhaul. The Turkish land forces come with a bunch of vehicles that they can operate across the battlefield and keep infantry in, APCs and IFVs that have enough armor to get infantry pretty close to a fight. And with the variations you have of those vehicles, everything from a 25mm to an MG3 RWS or an MK19 grenade launcher or the open top ACV, you have a lot of firepower that can address enemy infantry. This makes the Turkish land forces highly mobile and fast too at getting from place to place, similar to what you see with the PLA Marines and the Russian Airborne Forces. Now, we've talked a little bit about the defensive capabilities under the infantry combat overhaul, along with mechanized infantry being used to push those objectives. Another thing we really didn't discuss too much outside of those smaller interactions is just the speed at which you need to be moving out of main to disrupt what the enemy is doing, especially if you think they're going to be setting up a defensive position. And with all the vehicles and options you have in the Turkish land forces, I think this is a Blue 4 option to handle that and to offset some of the speed that you may find with the PLA Marines or the Russian Airborne Forces. Obviously, we'll see if the TLF struggles against heavy armor, for example, tanks, especially if they're running into infantry, and the fact that you don't have an IFV with some sort of guided missile to offset the fact that you don't have a hat. However, since the TLF seems to lean more towards mechanized infantry, I could see groupings of tanks and some of the Pars 3 or the ACV working together to help cover the tank so that it is not left alone against a ton of infantry and armored vehicles. Because you'll need to support the M60T to keep it up and running against enemy tanks. Of course, every faction should have a certain amount of maybe advantages and disadvantage to each of them. And the Turkish land forces don't feel any different from that. They feel unique in their own way. And that's really exciting, and I'm really stoked to get more into this faction to see how it operates, especially from a strategic standpoint. So with that said, I want to know what you guys think of the Turkish land forces in the comments down below. Like I said, there are other videos I've already made that cover some of the basics about weaponry and vehicles, and we'll probably be doing a vehicle guide in the near future to break down more about the vehicles specific to the TLF. And if you haven't already, like the video, hit the subscribe button, and I will see you all next time.